Good afternoon, cohorters. Welcome to week 8 of the xAPI cohort. I really like the comment Megan made in the chat below. Feel free to interact and engage as much as you need this week. But yes, Megan, it's like xAPI cohort was designed for social distancing. So as much as we're all going through in the world today, I'm glad that we can join together for this hour to nerd out over data and data specifications and just learn together. So thank you all for being here. Feel free to engage in that chat and really use that space for the social connection. That's what we have it designed for. Quick reminder, we're on web session 8 today. Today is March 19th. We have 12 weeks, so it's really hard to believe that, what are we, like 2-3/4 of the way through this season, this session, this semester. But lots of progress being made, lots of teams still moving through, and lots of updates for this week. So really glad to jump in today and welcome everyone. Last week, we had 462 folks registered for cohort. This week, we're at 480. So that's really exciting, and just want to remind you that it's never too late to sign up for cohort, and we might have folks coming in and joining cohort and either observing your projects, joining your Slack channels, asking questions, wanting to engage. That's what cohort is designed for. It's designed to be flexible, to allow for people to join and come in and stop when they don't have the time or capacity. So be aware that there might be new folks or newcomers. We're still growing as a cohort. Today on the agenda we have case studies presented, and Data Isn't Just for MI by Richard Pedley, who is a learning project manager with Fidelity. And then we'll get into some team check-ins with our GitHub page. Behind the mics today, you have myself, Jessica Jackson. We have Aaron Stellar and Jamie Washington, our producers, back all over, actually. We're working remote today, and we hope that everything runs smoothly this week. And thank you, team, for your support behind the scenes. So, like I said, today we have our second, so the next 2 weeks after today, and the previous session last week, we jumped into case studies. So we've gone through kind of a theoretical perspective of what xAPI is, how to use it with how to use profiles, what the ecosystem looks like, and now we're seeing some real on-the-ground case studies in addition to the demos that are coming up. This is something new we've tried this semester, and they've been going great. Last week we had 4 case studies presented by Duncan. This week we're going to learn about how to use data beyond management groups. And next week we'll have another case study from Wendy Morgan from the Frank Porter and Graham Institute at UNC Chapel Hill, and we'll wrap up our case studies with Tim Dickinson from Watershed, and then we'll hop into project team demos. I want to point out that project team demos are in the next couple of weeks, so in 2 weeks we'll start. So next week we'll probably release the signups to see which date your team would like to demo. And you don't have to have a perfect project, a finished project to demonstrate it. You can just talk through where you're at, what you're learning, and it's always great to share with the team. This is a great space to get feedback from everyone. All right, I think, Richard, are you back in and have access? I just saw in the chat that you got kicked out for a second. Let me know, let's hear your mic, and I'll get it transitioned over to your presentation. Uh-oh. I think he may have gotten kicked out again.
Richmond, Wyoming is probably not the same. So this is Megan. I'm going to jump in. And while we let Richard come back, looks like we've got some echo. But I was over back when we were still all allowed to travel in London at the Learning Technologies Conference and had gotten paired up with Richard Pedley to do a session on xAPI. So I did my usual, what is xAPI? Get everybody whipped up and excited about it. And what's funny is that when I do my session, everybody asks me, well, tell me about the really great case studies. And as you can imagine, it takes me a good hour just to go through what is xAPI and how do you do it and what are the pieces and the vocabulary words. And so it was fabulous to be followed up immediately by Richard, who had a really great case study and share his story. And even as we were preparing to do that session, I'd never met him before. As we were preparing to do that session, I got on the phone and we're talking, and he's talking and talking and talking and telling about the data and what they did with the data, the things they were looking at, what they tried and what didn't work. And I thought, oh, this is exactly what we need to hear about in Cohort. So we are, I believe we're all set and ready to rock behind the scenes. So I'm going to put myself on mute, and with any luck, the next voice you hear will be Richard's coming to you from the UK.
Hear me? If someone could just say yes, I'll take that as everybody. Yay, thanks, Megan. Okay, so that's possibly the best intro I've ever had in my life. I appreciate that. I'll ping you my boss's details later, and I'm sure you can have a lovely chat. That'll be helpful. So thank you very much for taking the time. And it was interesting, actually, just listening earlier, there was a piece about kind of the projects. Oh, I'm a bit garbly. Hang on. I'm sure I can. Let me just turn the volume up, it might help. But there's a piece about your projects, and I think Megan sort of mentioned that they don't need to be perfect, and that's probably just as well, because mine case study certainly isn't, still work in progress as we go through. But I wanted to take a little while just to kind of share with you what we're doing. There is a poll, and I've been informed that MI means nothing in America. So for your information, that in UK that's management information, which is another way of saying producing a pack for your boss that I won't read, but it's got lots of lovely pictures and charts about what you're doing and justifying your existence effectively. So there's a poll open for kind of when you're thinking about how you want to use your learning data, what's really your main focus for using it, and there's a number of different options open there. Okay, yeah, I will try and slow down, but yeah, so management information, so that's really focusing on who's done what when, etc., and mostly not read by senior management in my experience, so I don't spend too long on it. So what I want to really point out that data isn't just around telling your bosses what you are or aren't doing and how successful things are. There's a kind of a right way to do data, so the ideal world, and I'm sure Megan and certainly the guys from Warcheck, because they tell me about it all the time. So there's a blank sheet of paper plan, and this is kind of what do I actually want to know. So learning measures, is it for reporting purposes, is it to improve the learning that I've created? What data do I need? So do I need to know about the users? What do I need to know regarding learning, performance data? How can I capture my data? So this is regarding whether you do API integrations with xAPI or whether you actually just manually upload spreadsheets, and then what technology you're going to need, so SCORM, xAPI, learning record stores, learning management systems, learning experience platforms is LXP, in case anybody wants to know, and analytics. And what are you going to put in place to make sure you're capturing that data? So how we got started with this was we kind of fell into it, really. So Fidelity is a sister company of FMR, which you may know in the US, but Fidelity International covers pretty much the rest of the globe, really, other than the US. Including Canada. So we used to define ourselves as an asset management firm that also happens to provide some savings solutions. But we're moving from that to still being an asset management firm, but focusing on retirement solutions. So whether that's through the asset management work we do, or whether that's through more direct kind of services that we provide. And it's really about trying to make sure that we help our customers get the retirement that they need. That's quite a large cultural shift. We have quite a rich heritage of a number of years of thinking ourselves as asset management firm. To shift that to becoming a retirement firm is quite tricky. People don't tend to think about their own retirement, let alone others. So there was a lot of work to do both culturally, but also from a technical perspective to ensure that people were able to support our customers appropriately. And we didn't live in an ideal world when it came to learning. So we had some constraints in place. We had an existing learning management system that at the time when we started this had no xAPI capability. It couldn't capture the xAPI data for us. It now can, but it's fairly basic. We already had some e-learning capability, but most people didn't know how to use it. And we run Learning Light, so there are very limited learning specialists out there. Thank you, not a lot of Richards, or better people than me. But our opportunities were, we had some really dedicated funding, and we had a strong desire from our senior leadership. So we didn't have to go in and justify our spend with lots of data because we didn't have any data. We used Captivate as our e-learning tool. David, I don't know if you can make out my garble. But we had a senior leadership team who recognised that we didn't capture learning data already, but that we needed to make a cultural shift and we needed to upskill our staff, and it was the right thing to do. We also had an honest learning partner, who we'll come on to later because it's not a sell for them, but I think that's really critical if you're going to be doing any big program. Is you need, if you're recruiting a vendor, you need a vendor that's going to tell you all the things that you're doing wrong, rather than just say yes all the time. Because otherwise, what's the point? You might as well just do it yourself. So, what did we actually build? And I'll come on to the data. Trust me. So we've got about 18 hours worth of digital learning content, split across 3 levels of difficulty, with 6 modules in each of those. We built a front end over our learning management system because our learning management system is fairly compliance based, so you don't get much kind of story to it. You pretty much get, here's a bit of e-learning, and we wanted to really tell a story with what we're creating. So the story-based approach, we had lots of animations, and we had an awful lot of drama video. So we've got 32 minutes of video filming some professional actors playing a family of characters, and then we built on that family through the back end. The new e-learning tool we chose to go with was one called Domo. Now I'll come on to reasons why in a bit. We also wanted to integrate our front end, which was our SharePoint site, into our learning management system. So effectively, you can access all of the learning from the SharePoint site and wouldn't ever need to see our learning management system. But at the same time, we also wanted to track your progress, so we can show progress through the program using the SharePoint site now. We purchased a new learning tool, so I said that was Gomo, and that allows us to do xAPI tracking when Cornerstone didn't, and I'll cover that in a moment. We also looked at our learning analytics capability, i.e. we didn't have some, and we needed some.
Hey, Richard, can you hear me? Okay, so Luke can hear me. Richard, I'm going to do something real quick.
we're going to pause your presentation. I'm pasting a phone number into the chat. Please, Richard only. Okay. Oh, I think we totally lost Richard. Okay. Please don't, everybody, if your name is not Richard Pedley, please don't phone that number. If you can hear me talking, you should be in good shape right now. We're going to have Richard call in. And Jamie, can you please give provide some instructions that you could put onto a notepad on top of the PowerPoint slide so that when Richard logs back in, he can, he's not playing back a recording, folks. Give me just a second. He is as all of us are, winging it with home technology, and he's on an iPad today, and it's not supporting him as well as he would like to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up so that when he comes back, we've got directions for him in order to dial in a different way so that he'll be on phone for a little bit and screen for a little bit, even if we have to advance his PowerPoint for him. So I'm going to do a quick poll just in chat while you're here. How many of you had always or have already also had technology conference call connection issues? Quick yes or no in the chat just to kind of, right, not with Cohort, but with your life this week. So Lauren has had absolutely zero technology connectivity issues this week. Lauren, whatever it is, sparkly juju dust that you have, we would love some. So Catherine, either absolutely zero technology glitches this week. So you are in fine, lucky shape. David too. See, this is fantastic. Those of us who are, right, those of us who are used to working in this environment, those of us who are used to working without hitches, I'm just going to ask that you all have a little bit of patience for our colleagues. Not every presenter, you know what, Brian, I agree completely. In an ideal world, we would all be on a desktop in our offices or somewhere where we have a wired Ethernet connection, but not all of us have that opportunity. So one of the things I'm doing with all of this time frame is actually thinking about how can I extend help and patience to everybody else. So I'm going to ask you guys to do the same thing as we get Richard connected back up here. So the next question I'm going to ask is, at this point in the cohort, type in a chat. At this point in the cohort, what questions do you have? What things are you struggling with? What things are you like, man, I thought after 8 weeks I'd have this nailed, and I still can't figure that out. So that's one thing. The next thing I'm going to do is that if you're here on a project team, I'm just going to go ahead and say it's probably going to be super difficult, or could be super difficult. You may also have the same technology problems when it comes time to give your team's update. So I'm going to have you open up your notepad or a sticky note or whatever, start typing on a different screen, not your Adobe Connect screen, start typing on a different screen what your team's update would be today. So if the time comes when Jess calls on you to do your update, if you had something that isn't already updated in your GitHub, go ahead, even if you think you have impeccable technology, go ahead, type that up on a separate window, be ready to paste that into the chat when we get that to that point, and then we can make sure that that part of today moves as smoothly as possible. I'm going to ask the team at Cohort behind the scenes to let me know when Richard is ready to rock and roll. If you are answering my question of what questions do you have, and Richard comes back online, we'll pause that conversation and we will cut straight to the featured presentation of today. We'll get Richard and I'll make sure that we get your answers to you afterwards. So, okay, so it sounds like he can't call in. So we're going to figure what out else is going there. Jessica is saying, if there's time, I would love to hear more about Learning Technologies Month. What were my biggest takeaways? And what tools do I recommend for the analytics of LRS data? So thanks, Luke, for bringing that question from prior. So let's start with Jessica's question. Learning Technologies was really, really awesome. If you think about just from so in the U.S., our conferences tend to be conferences that have expos on the side. And even the expos that are big like DevLearn or the massive like ATD are they're the second thing, but it's the the conference is the main thing. And what's different about the Learning Technologies Conference is that somebody described it to me as it's an expo where a conference broke out, right? And so it has this great big expo with vendors that we don't see in the U.S. And then a smaller conference next door to it. And the conference is run with fewer, bigger sessions. So think of a nearly as big as an AT and fancy and splashy as an ATD expo, but then a 700-person conference on the side with only 4 or 5 simultaneous sessions going on. So there's 120 people in each session or so. So it was kind of neat. I guess my biggest takeaway was I was really impressed with how, I'm using this term more and more these days, consumer grade all the technology was. It was as though a bunch of big advertising agencies came into the L&D space, so lots of big splashiness. What tools do I recommend for analytics of LRS data? So I'm going to kind of dig behind the scenes here, right? If you think about your learning management system is used to rectangular data, and so it's got a reporting function that will serve you up its known data, because most learning management systems in a SCORM environment know all of the data that will ever be sent to them. And the analytics aren't rich, they're not fancy, they don't look like any of the spiffy whiz-bang tools that everybody else in our organizations have. At the same time, learning record stores, that's all they've got. They're a database with an analytics platform laid on top of them, or the beginnings of it, reporting and dashboarding. How about that? It's not full-on analytics laid on top. And so your learning management system doesn't know how to deal with all of the data that isn't known to it. Right? So if you're thinking about an xAPI statement, right, the active verb object, that's easy. It's the context and the extensions where we can be writing all sorts of interesting stuff in there. That's where the interesting stuff for reporting is, my perspective. I don't care about your verb counts. I don't care how many people launched or experienced or completed or answered or whatever. I want to know some of the extra data around that. So when you're looking at using that data, you're going to be using that data in a learning record store. So your learning record store, really rich data. Veracity has some really nice visualizations. Learning Locker has some really nice visualizations. Watershed has the ability, a lot of ability to very easily connect to it. And I think Jessica's point is spot on here, right? So if you're looking at your LRS and you're like, wow, there's not much data here, I can't do a lot here, it's because you're not sending it to it. You need to send your data to the LRS in order to get the cool things there. Your LMS is really going to struggle. So I think somebody early on was hoping that they were going to send their data from their LRS to their LMS and get good reports out of their LMS as a result. And what you want to do is you want to flip it around the other way. Your LMS can't accept outside data, certainly not the rich data you're interested in, nor can it nor can it in general, right? I'm making broad generalizations here, nor can it then do great visualizations. Now, I want to say about 4 years ago, Rob Hauk from UL LearnShare and I did a presentation in which we used the magic of PowerPoint to show the LMS and the LRS blending. Right? Over time, you'll see the LRS companies come out with the ability to host, manage your users, keep track of requirements, and your LMS companies come out with the ability to do much better reporting and accept data from the outside. At the same time, your LMS companies are adding on LXP layers, that learning experience platform that makes the required learning and the formal learning in the LMS come together and play nicely with the informal learning and data streams. Luke asks, is anybody sending LRS data to Power BI or some other standard BI tools? Absolutely. The folks at HubSpot are doing that. Mayo Clinic's looking at doing that. There's a number of organizations that are then taking their LRS data and moving that back to the BI tools so that then the rest of your organization gets an insight as to what you're doing in the training world. There's still a place for the LRS in that space. Let me see if I can get a whiteboard pod here. I'm adding it myself, folks. I'm just going to throw it on top. And because the thinking here, because somebody says, well, gosh, if I've got Power BI, why do I need an LRS, right? Eric, I'd love to know what LMS vendor you have. So yes, many dashboards and reporting abilities, absolutely. I'm hoping that LRS can output CSVs. It should be able to populate those pretty pictures. So Eric, what you'll want to do is ask your LMS vendor if they will allow you to report on the structure of the xAPI data that you're sending it, which might be a little bit challenging for it. But I would love to see what you come up with. So one way to look at this, Absorb LMS. And are they, so does Absorb, Eric, have a full LRS inside? Right, so I draw a picture like this, right? So I have my learning record store, and typically you can attach some LMSs to it. I'm going to ask you to put up with both the resolution and my poor drawing skills. Right, so I have a couple of LMSs here. Bonus points, type in the chat. I'm about to use an acronym, LRP. What's an LRP? Learning record provider, bingo. Okay, so I have, right, my learning record providers, which could be, notice I've got learning record providers that are also going to be inside my LMSs. I've got learning record providers that stand outside. So if I have xAPI apps, right, then thanks, Mr. Klaver. Right, so I have my learning record providers inside my LMS. My LMS can also be a learning record provider. And then I have learning record providers that are outside my LRS, whether it's my chatbot or my Slack or you know, your Alexa skills, your Unity 3D games that are being played outside the LMS, right? Because your LMS doesn't know what to do with them. All those things are feeding into the LRS. The LRS is then backfeeding to your fancy BI tools. That's supposed to be BI, not DI. Looks like Lady Di, right? There's a BI. And so as I'll tell you about 18 to 24 months ago, I started drawing this picture and was working with some pretty data-heavy clients. And what we got to was, you know, well, why do I need a learning record store if I have BI? And it's because your BI tools don't want to give data back to other things. Your learning record providers in the learning space are going to want to get that data and use it amongst themselves. So I'm going to put this whiteboard on pause right now because it looks like we have Richard back, and we're going to give a try on a different audio device. Unfortunately, our 800 number and his cell phone carrier did not work nicely together. So I'm going to pause talking, and Richard, turn it over to you, and we'll see how that goes.
Okay, can you guys, can you hear me at all?
It is marvelously
Much better.
Hey, there we go. My terrible headset. I shall put that, I can't, it's my work one, but I might try and put it in the bin. Okay. Perfect. So.
Okay, Richard, stay nice and close.
Yeah, let me turn the microphone.
You want to wait for a little while? Stay nice and stay in your mouth.
There you go. Is that any better?
Yeah.
Okay. If it's not, tell me to stop at some point, and I will try. Hopefully, it won't kick me out again either. But we'll see how we get on. So apologies all. I think Megan had done quite a good job of translating most of my garble for me, which was fantastic. So thank you. I will carry on where I was, and we'll see how we get on. So what we built. So we had effectively 18 hours worth of learning content, pretty much, give or take, and we put it across 3 levels of difficulty, and then we put 6 modules of learning with each of those 3 levels. And then within each of those modules, we broke down each piece to 20-minute segments. And what we really wanted to encourage people to do was to do 20 minutes worth of learning and then to stop and go away. And that gave us some challenges because our learning culture within Fidelity is perhaps not so strong. So getting people to kind of go away and come back is difficult, because getting them come back is the hard part. Asking them to leave is pretty easy. We also wanted to build a front end for our learning management systems. So we use Cornerstone as our learning management system. It's fairly compliance orientated, so you can't really tell a story with learning, and it focuses much more on the structured content. Now, it'd be nice if occasionally people could just stick something in the chat, so I know I'm still connected and it hasn't kicked me out, but we shall see. We then wanted to, as I said, take a story-based approach to our content. So, excellent, thank you. So what we did was we kind of had a couple of animated characters, which we called Freddy and Feedy, which were named by the learners in our pilot group. But then we also had 32 minutes worth of drama video. Now, this won't translate, I don't think, in the US, but in the UK I usually say that it's an episode of EastEnders. But one of our kind of core things that we wanted to do, and one of our core measures, weirdly, was to make people cry, ultimately. So the last part of the video is very heart-wrenching, and we know that we've built empathy with the family that we'd built, and the professionals actors have built, if we were able to make our audience cry. So we built the front end in SharePoint. We are currently using SharePoint on-premise. We're moving to SharePoint online, but all we did really, and it sounds much flashier than it is we built some SharePoint pages, and then we integrated through the report functionality and the report API in Cornerstone, so that we put some deep links, which are the circles you can see on the slide, so people could click on those and it would automatically launch the learning and they wouldn't have to go to Cornerstone. But at the same time, we also then put an API integration so that when they completed a particular piece of learning, that completion would show within the SharePoint site, so they would also be able to track their progress. So there really is no need for them to actually access Cornerstone, but all of the learning content is still held within that system. We purchased a new e-learning tool, which I'll talk more about later, but was called Gomo. And this effectively, not only was it our e-learning tool, but it was also our learning record store at that point in time, enabling us to capture some xAPI data, which Cornerstone at that point in time couldn't handle. We also knew that we needed some learning analytics capability. We didn't have any at all, so we needed something, and I'll talk about that in a moment as well. But coming back to that kind of engagement piece that I spoke about, where we're asking learners to leave and then come back, that was a real struggle for us, and we've taken 2 approaches to this, and actually data is core for both of our approaches. So we have a purpose-built email application which takes data out of Gomo and out of Cornerstone, and will send learners an email once a month that's personalised for them, and talks about where they're spending their time compared to others, what they're doing, how far they've got through, what content they've discovered, etc., etc. And that allows us to engage them back into the learning content without us having to spend lots of time on comms. And we've also built an accolades infrastructure. So if any of you have a fitness app, I'm sure you'll recognise some of our structure and I'll show it to you in a moment. But very similar principle. You do certain stuff and you get some electronic badges, and it's just another way of trying to encourage some people back in the UK. We are not expecting that to work very well, just because we're all quite cynical, but in some of our other countries such as India, we're expecting that to go down quite well. So we're just exploring, kind of getting the feedback now on how that's working. So where we started with data was naive, I think, is how I would say it, and probably frustrating for our partners. So we knew that data was going to be really important. That we knew. We knew it was going to be important so that we could review the program, understand what people were looking at and what was useful. We didn't really, I think, know quite exactly what we were going to use it for. We knew that we needed to capture data differently. And we needed to capture it efficiently because we don't have lots of people, so we need it automated. We knew we wanted as much data as we could get, right? Because we didn't know exactly what we were going to use it for. So we had some fairly basic rules, which was capture as much as you can and then work out what you're going to use it for later and how you're going to use it later. But get it, because if you don't have it, you've got no chance. So yeah, I think that's kind of the key piece, is you kind of don't need to plan everything up front. Sometimes it's just getting started and then worrying about the details a little bit later on. Given my job title as a learning project manager, probably shouldn't be saying that, but there we go. So I think a lot of this for us was quite a bit of discovery about actually what data can do. And if you look at this fairly typical pyramid, got data at the bottom, and actually nowhere on there will you see a piece about justifying our existence or telling our senior leaders what programs are doing or return on investment. Okay, for us, data that is not yet important, and I'm sure it will be, but at the moment what we're using it for is driving engagement, helping us with our communications, and kind of really importantly at the top two, driving behaviours of curiosity and then rewarding those behaviours. One of our core values and one of our core behaviours that we want people to be is curious, and learning has a massive part to play in that. And actually, data has a huge part to play in encouraging people to become curious and then seeing what's working and what's not. So what can data do again? This is an image of the emails that we send out, and we were really lucky in that we managed to build all of this just for internal. Now, what I will say is part of the justification when we did this was that it has the potential for use with some of our external clients. So we look after lots of companies' pension plans for them and provide the employees with their pension savings. So actually, if we're helping our own staff understand retirement in the broader context, but also retirement planning and why it's important for themselves, there is the opportunity to use some of that externally. And interestingly, though we have kind of got something that we could use, the organisation's chosen not to use it in a broad sense because they don't want to take away from the fact that this was designed for our staff first, and so they don't want staff feeling that kind of we've built something for an external client and then happen to give it to them. So they've been quite good, I think, in thinking of it as that way. So this is an example of the automated email, and I don't know how much of it you're able to see depending on the size. So it does tell them kind of where they are within the program, but more importantly for me, it also tells them where they're spending their time compared to others. And then it gives them a little bit dashboard about kind of hidden content and how much of that they've seen at the moment. So on our front end that we built in SharePoint, it has kind of videos of our senior leadership doing slightly odd things. It has outtakes from all of the video that we filmed. It even has some outtakes of the animations, which, when you think about it, actually requires a lot of work because you've got to build that. So there's kind of quite a lot of hidden content that we've kind of scattered around that SharePoint site with the aim of kind of encouraging that conversation, hopefully, when we're all allowed back in the office, around the office, when they're getting their cups of teas and coffee, say, oh, did you see such and such, and did you see that? And people go, no, I haven't seen that. And then they go back to the site to go and have a look, and as a consequence, get back into the learning piece again. So whilst we are tracking progress, we're also trying to reinforce the piece around curiosity. So this is the reward that we spoke about. So these are our badges. As you can see, it is fairly stereotypical kind of gym or fitness app basis. So if you haven't got it, you can put your mouse over it. And again, this is all in SharePoint. You can put your mouse over it and it will tell you what you need to get it. And then when you get it, it goes coloured and it tells you what you did to get it. But all of this, again, is being driven by data from, yeah, it's a good one. So all of this is being driven by data from its xAPI data in the main. So we don't use Cornerstone badge functionality because Cornerstone badge functionality will only allow us to reward for completion, whereas what we've built in SharePoint, there's, I think, 3, maybe 4 badges which are focused on completion, and all of the others are based on curiosity and exploration, and going and finding hidden data, going and looking at extra links, spending time in the structured learning content that isn't mandatory to do, going back and looking at stuff over certain periods of time. So there's one badge sprint there that I think takes 3 months to earn, for example. So they're kind of far more focused on that curiosity side rather than kind of the pure completion element, which is what we're trying to really reward and encourage. Cornerstone, just the way that the one that version we have, because we don't update as much as we should, is far more focused around completion and kind of, yeah, you know, doing structured learning. And we really want to reward that kind of unstructured piece. So moving on, yeah, it's hard to stay current with Cornerstone. So what are we using? So hopefully this will answer some questions. So we engaged with a company called Leo, which is part of a broader organisation called Learning Technologies Group. And Leo have effectively built all of the content for us. It's all bespoke content. And then as part of their broader group, they have a number of offerings, and it just felt sensible, easy to kind of go with their extended group, partly from our onboarding process is quite stringent and difficult, but also because a lot of this was already integrated. So we have Cornerstone, which was one of our restrictions. That was our global learning management system. But as I said, it's, you know, quite compliance focused and focused very much on structured learning. So we wanted to tell a bit more of a story. So we put SharePoint over the front, and SharePoint integrated in Cornerstone, giving us the completion data, but hyperlinked, deep linked into Cornerstone, so you could access the learning content. And then Gomo is the e-learning authoring tool. So effectively, it's a bit weird, but what it really does for us is it pushes a hyperlink onto Cornerstone. So when you upload your e-learning course onto Cornerstone, all it's really doing is putting a hyperlink on them. So when you access it in Cornerstone, it then sends you to Gomo's hosting site, and then it captures all of the xAPI data in Gomo for you, because Cornerstone at that point couldn't capture it for us. So really, if you think about the end user, when they click on the link in SharePoint, it's sending them to Cornerstone, which is then sending them to Gomo to actually then launch the course. So the fact that it only takes a few seconds to open it is, as far as I'm concerned, quite impressive. And then we've integrated Gomo, there's a missing line there, but we've integrated Gomo with Watershed and Cornerstone with Watershed. So all of the xAPI data, so all of our learning data is coming from Gomo and going to Watershed. So no real learning data is coming out of Cornerstone. But what Cornerstone does give us is our staff hierarchy data. So we can then do reporting for line management, etc., by department, by area, by location, which obviously Gomo won't hold because Cornerstone is linked into our HR systems. And then underneath that, you can see our Django, our content management system. So this is the piece that effectively creates those emails for us and sends those bespoke emails out. And it also feeds the Accolade data back into the SharePoint side, so those badges. And that is all fed from Watershed directly. So it picks up all the data from Watershed and then pushes it through that way. So that's what we've got structures at the moment. We're going to do some more stuff, but that's kind of the first pieces. So I did speak earlier about kind of how we are looking to use data outside of just driving the behavioural change around curiosity, which is absolutely key. But obviously it has greater impact as well around kind of improving the programme and understanding what people are doing. Now, when I showed this at Learning Tech, I got a fantastic challenge, which was, yeah, but you can do all of this next bit with SCORM. So I've added in an extra slide to show that we're doing more. But you're right, you could do all of this next bit with SCORM. I think the point is we don't, because you get it out in an Excel spreadsheet and then you spend years trying to make sense of it. Whereas with our learning analytics tool, because it's kind of all API'd in, we don't have to do any downloads or uploads or fiddling around. We can just pull this reporting. And the joy that this particular tool gives us over others is that we can create a site, whether that's using Microsoft Teams or using SharePoint, where instead of having to provide monthly MI to our senior leadership team, yes, so well, I'll share my budget at the end. So instead of providing monthly MI or information to our senior leadership team around the programme or around what individuals are doing on the programme, which we know that they probably then won't read unless you're sat in the room with them. What this particular system enables us to do is create a website or put it on Teams and just send them to the website. So you say, well, once a month, if you really need to, you can go and come and have a look here. But even better than that, it's a real live data stream. So they can look at it at any point and have completely up-to-date data, which will kind of take them through what people are doing. So here you can see we've got just over 1,500 people in the program. We've got 804 people completing it. It's taking them 20 days to do it, which is fantastic for me. I love that. The longer it takes them to do it, the better, because that's exactly the kind of behaviour I want to see. We haven't locked any of the content down, so people could just next through every single screen. And yeah, Jessica, this is from Watershed, so you could just next through every single screen and do the whole of this content in 20 minutes, but people aren't. People are doing it in the right way, which is good. And then it gives us a bit of a breakdown. So this is the first level of kind of what those drop-off rates were. So 72% pretty much completed the first one. And then it starts, you can see it starts to come down, but actually the drop after the first one, so you get a lot of people drop from the first to the second, but then after that, from making contributions down to leaving legacy, that kind of retention rate is pretty good. So we're quite happy with the introduction level. This program of learning has all been about kind of moving the needle and shifting it from a compliance focused and a mandatory learning environment into a place where people choose to do learning rather than being forced to. I haven't looked at the time delay between the milestones, and that's a really good point, Luke. It's something really interesting to have a look at, and I will scribble that away because that's helpful to think about. But kind of coming to the point of where we were with this, this is our next level. So we've shown you the introduction level. This is our foundation level. Now this is where it gets a little bit more technical and a little bit more difficult, but at the same time we tend to have a slightly more focused audience. So total audience size of the program was 5,500 people. We're expecting for a foundations level to reduce that down to probably about 2,000. And as you can see, 573 people are in it and nobody has completed all 6 levels. So that instantly tells us we've got a problem. If we look at Savings Landscape, which is the first module, and then the drop to the second, which is making contributions, is compared to the first one absolutely huge. So we wanted to understand actually what's causing this. And the second and the third level, because they had a slightly more targeted audience around our operations and client services, so call centre teams, we had introduced some testing, although we didn't call it testing. We've got a fancy name for it, which has gone out of my head now. But effectively, we were asking people to take a test at the end of each module, and it had a relatively high pass rate. You could move between the modules, so you didn't have to take the test. You could do all 6 modules and just do the learning and not do the tests. But interestingly, when we went and spoke to people as a consequence of looking at this, because you can get individual names and ask them kind of what stopped them, they were failing the test, and then they didn't want to move on to the next module until they passed the test. They were fully aware they could, but they were choosing not to because they felt that they needed to pass the test. That was their own personal preference before they then moved on. And they were finding the test difficult, and that actually then stopped them from engaging with any of the other content. So we all wandered back and as a working group had a long think about what the program was really there to do. And so we've made a change to the learning content in that whilst we still have knowledge checks, that was the word I was looking for, whilst we still have the knowledge checks at the end of each module, rather than them being a test, we've now put them as a quiz. So there's no pass or fail rate. If you get the wrong answer, you get told what the correct answer is and why that's the correct answer. And at the end, you also get directed to the appropriate section. So if you were struggling on a particular topic, it will send you back to the appropriate section, and then you can move on. So that, I think, has seen a change in that. It's still early days. We only put it in recently, but we've already seen those kind of completion numbers go up. The key thing is that we're still capturing the data, so we still understand what people are getting right, what people are getting wrong, and if we need to do some face-to-face interventions, we can. So if I skip forward one to this one, so this is the type of stuff that you won't get from SCORM. So this is an individual question that we are asking learners, and they can access these knowledge checks at any point. They don't have to wait until they've done all of the learning content. They could come and do this first, they could come and do it after an hour, whatever works for them. But these are one of the questions, and we can see that we've got 15 people correctly chosen those 3 as the correct answers, and it's taken them 26 seconds to answer that. So it's a relatively simple question, but it gives us the opportunity to understand actually what particular questions are people struggling on. Is there therefore something we need to change in our online content, or actually is there something we need our face-to-face delivery guys to intervene in and provide some better context that sometimes you can only really do in a classroom environment, be that virtually in this sort of environment, or be that kind of in an actual room and everybody kind of having a conversation about it. So we're still capturing the data, but we've just kind of removed the pass rate effectively. What can other things can data do? So for me, the bottom chart probably is the one that's the most telling. So we launched our first content back in February 2019. That was our first level, and we can see a nice, that's that first kind of blue spike associated with these green, red and yellow lines, and those are where we've started to do some communications. So that nice big green spike was a nice big, that nice big blue spike, the first one, was so big and blue because we were able to get people to interact with us face to face. We went out with some virtual reality and we kind of really engaged them. And then the following pieces of comms are just either blogs or articles on our intranet site. So each time we do it, we get a spike, but it's a little bit smaller. And then when you get into towards the latter part of the year, so September 2019, that's when we released our second phase of content. And again, we did an awful lot more comms. So you can see, again, a nice big spike. And it stayed up quite high for a little while, but then started to drop down, I think, as people couldn't pass those assessments and they started to lose interest. So we're hoping that we'll start to see another spike once we get past the current environment and we can start communicating some of the changes that we've made and encouraging people into it a little bit more. So kind of just to recap some of the stuff I said at the beginning, very close to the end. You can have a plan and it's good to plan, but don't let that get in the way of you just getting started, because sometimes you don't know what questions you want to ask until you've got the data, because the data that you'll see will then lead you to ask other questions, and then you'll see more data and then you'll ask more questions. But if you don't start getting it, then you'll start losing it. it's way more powerful. Data is way more powerful than just reporting up, and even just from finding out what people are doing in the program and what works. It's key to driving behavioural change, and if you don't capture it, then you'll miss out on a lot of ways of changing people's behaviours and rewarding them and communicating to them about it. And you can do it without kind of restarting with a whole new learning management system and a whole new piece of e-learning content and a whole new etc, etc. So last slide for me. So what are we doing next? So we want to integrate our SharePoint into Watershed so we can capture our unstructured learning content better, because a lot of our storytelling is in SharePoint and we want to capture whether people are using that and what they're doing with that. We want to use Teams as our way of now doing our reporting so that we don't have to waste any time and effort in creating reporting packs for senior leadership. We just direct them to a Teams site and they get real-time data whenever they want it. And we are creating a 2-year onboarding program for one of our areas where we are going to be using data to drive the kind of experience and the program that each individual new starter has. So every new employee that joins that piece will have a completely different and bespoke onboarding process, receiving different training to anybody else that may have started at exactly the same time, based on the data that we're capturing about how they're progressing, what they're doing well at, what they're struggling at, and providing interventions that they actually need rather than just because it's their time to have them. So we're working on that at the moment. I shall end here and I'll pass back to Megan. Hopefully that will work. We'll see.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Richard.
Go, Jeff. He had passed it off to me, and I was actually going to say, I'm going to pass it off to Jeff because I don't know what kind of thing.
So I'm going to hop into some cohort updates. Just want to let folks know that might have to hop off. We understand. We're going to keep going with updates just so that they're captured in the recording. And you can always move forward to this point in the recording so that you can see team updates. For today, for updates, what we're going to ask is if your team has not submitted your updates on our GitHub page, you're going to go ahead and just put them into the chat. So that will help us capture your team's updates and also share it in the recording, and then we'll also be able to move efficiently to the end of our session. So just a reminder, for week 8, we're still working, iterating, and digging into the details of our projects and preparing for the demonstration in the next few weeks. So at this moment, I'm going to ask teams. Megan asked you earlier to type up your updates if you hadn't put them on GitHub. So if you want to post all of your updates right in the chat, we're not going to read them out, but that's available for folks to review. And I'm going to change over my screen so that we can review those who have submitted via GitHub. And so I'm going to share my screen now. So this week, we only had about 4 teams submit their updates, and I'm just going to read them for those teams. This week for Team Alexa, we have quite a few accomplishments. So Megan added some intents to the call flow. Brian walked through how to create new intents in VoiceFlow. Brian also renamed some of the blocks to help organize them. Brian also created a master intent block. So as they add new utterances to each intent, we can do a single place. There's no needs or support right now, and in the next week, they want to clean up and rename some of the intents so that they're more descriptive, and Easy will create a single interaction block to send statements to the LRS using the intent as the users respond, and this will serve as a template for later statements. We also have an update from Team Early Childhood Education. It's been a really hectic week, so Joanne was not able to get as much done as she'd hoped for, but did complete some mapping of the competencies. She is looking for some feedback, so if you want to offer feedback to this team, go ahead and check them out in Slack. What she hopes to accomplish in the next week is to work with Pebble, an InDesign plugin, and complete mapping of the competencies. Pebble had quite a funny update this week, which I hope everyone is upholding. They washed their hands and is looking for some Lysol, as we all are. And the final team that submitted an update was Team Smart Builder to LRS. They have taken further steps to the dashboard creation to tell the story of their user competency. They resolved a few limitations on how they were designing their dashboard visualizations in Learning Locker, and will be spreading out specifics or aspects of the story between multiple dedicated dashboards or visualizations rather than trying to aggregate most of the data into one. This is going to help it be easier to consume, and they will likely dedicate a single dashboard or a series of visualizations per individual competencies. So those are the teams that were submitted via GitHub, and I see quite a few have submitted in our chat below. So when you can read them in the chat, or if you have to hop, you can review them in the recording. With that, we'll see you next week around the same time. Next week we have another case study presentation with Wendy Morgan of the Frank Porter Graham Institute at UNC Chapel Hill. Just a reminder, our xAPI party might be mostly online, but you can still sign up for it at torrancelearning.com. And then if you have any questions, you can email or message me. If there are other updates, feel free to add them in, and we'll capture them for the recording. With that, have an awesome Thursday. Keep washing your hands. Keep your hands away from your face. And keep practicing. I like to use physical distancing, but we can always still have some social connection the way we're doing online. Have a great Thursday, team.
let me tell y'all a story about a man who was on hold all day. Yes, he was. Now, maybe he had the time wrong, and maybe he didn't. There's just no way for me to say. And yes, I have seen some long hold times in my day. Yes, I have. And this was one of the worst. Now, this young man did not hang up the telephone, and you guess what happened?